Gas station attendant, thank God I met you. By Bluger44. It's about 8 PM last night. I was walking with a friend of mine, Sally, about a mile to the closest cafe. We're both girls in our early 20s, neither of us own a car. Sally didn't have her Opal card, which is the Aussie version of an Oyster card, basically an automatic ticketing system for public transport. So we were walking because this was our only option. It's still the summer over here, so it's pretty fairly well lit, and we weren't concerned with walking down the main roads. We finally arrived at this cafe and sat down. I was paying, but I only had my credit card, and sure enough, it was my cash only. Sally was on the phone when I got back to the counter, so I just gestured to her to stay put and guard the spot while I went to get the cash out. This is my home suburb, so I know there aren't no ATMs around, and my best bet is a gas station about a block away. I'm doing a light jog so I don't keep her waiting, when a balding, sweating guy approaches me in his late 40s with a tank top and no shoes on, comes pacing behind me as I pass the corner of the block. He walked behind me for about 100 meters. I didn't really think much of it. The gas station was the next building along. It almost seemed like this guy had just come out of a nice suburban house along the street, and it wasn't the witching hour, so I just assumed that he was going to go to the gas station like I was. He didn't even cross my mind as I entered the tiny convenience store, nor did he follow me in. In my peripheral, I saw him walk past the door and out of sight. I looked around for an ATM because they sometimes have an inside version. No luck. So I go up to this man in his 30s at the desk and then reluctantly ask him if they're able to do a cash out. He smiles and says of course, and then asks, "Is he with you?" I have no idea who he's talking about at first, and then he points to the man from earlier, pacing around outside the store. Now keep in mind, he didn't look at all menacing. He wasn't going back and forth just outside the door. He was drifting in the space outside, from the pavement to the gas pumps to the store front, seemingly aimlessly. I assumed that he was on drugs. I tell the clerk no, not thinking much of all of this. He says, "Oh, he was staring at you before. I thought he was your dad." I laughed it off. I honestly wasn't concerned at all. He was still kind of wandering around outside, and I honestly couldn't imagine him being able to even fix a gaze on anything. I thanked the clerk for the cash, but before I turn away to leave, he says, "Just wait and see if he goes first." We waited for a few minutes in silence, and this guy begins to pace back and forth directly towards the front wall of the store, looking straight ahead and never into the store. It looked like he was just on drugs and was in an amble that seemed harmless. Not once did I even catch his gaze, so I figured it would be safe to just slip out the back door and just walk to the cafe in the fairly bright light of dusk, especially since Sally was texting me asking where I was. I thanked the guy for his concern once again, assure him that I don't know the guy and am not involved in some weird scheme to rob the store, and head for the door. The clerk then asked me if he wants me to walk with him. I say that it should be alright and begin walking away from the block. As I leave the store, the drifting man stops pacing and makes a beeline straight towards me from the other end of the building. I seriously didn't think much of this guy at all until this point, but for the first time he was briskly walking in a straight line towards me. Not sporadic this time. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I start power walking so he doesn't think I'm just actively trying to escape him, still trying to convince myself that I'm just being paranoid and I should be more casual. I also didn't look behind me to see how close he is. I've reached the pavement on the other side of the gas pumps when I hear the clerk run outside yelling, "Go, run, run!" I was really confused and decided that I'd just glance over my shoulder. While looking back, I can see that he's grabbed the man from behind, and the balding man isn't even glancing behind him or trying to escape. He's just watching me run away. That's pretty much the end of this story. I kept running until I've crossed the road and then turned around, standing still. The clerk is still just holding on to the odd strange man. The clerk and I just look at each other in the bewilderment of what just happened, not really knowing what to do. He makes a hand gesture to go, and I thanked him with some other hand gestures multiple times. I then go back to Sally with the cash and brought some food before walking back home a different way. I still haven't seen the weird guy since, and I have no idea what happened after this. Crazy Neighbour by Mules.
A little backstory. I am a 16-year-old boy, but when this happened, I was 13 or 14. So it was June, and I wake up to someone knocking on the front door. Confused, I get up and go to see who is knocking. I open the door, and a man in his late 50s, early 60s is standing there with his wife and twin daughters who were 10. I call for my mum and go back to my room. Later, my mum tells me they are the new neighbours. I don't really care. So life goes on with them as our neighbours, and I notice that the man, we will call Jeff, has been really passive aggressive with me. This I don't care much about. So a month passes and my birthday's in 3 days. I'm excited and I get to have my best friends over. Back then, my friends and I were really into playing in the woods. There is a small path of woods next to my house, and I decided I would clear out a spot so we can play. We knew the owner of the land and he said it was okay to play there. While I'm picking up some sticks, I hear someone yelling. I notice Jeff at his front door yelling at me. He yells, "Get the fuck off of my property!" I live on a cul-de-sac, so I live on one side and he lives on the other, and there was a patch of woods between our houses. I was so confused because he didn't own the land I was on. I decided to ignore him and continue to work. Then he walks over to me and grabs my arm and drags me to my front door. He started yelling at me and my parents. It ended with my parents calling the police. I remember nothing happening, but he kept saying that I was on his property. I never was. Fast forward and it's now my birthday and my friends are over. We are in the woods and we play. While we were playing, we heard bushes start to rustle. We point our flashlights towards the bushes and what we saw still creeps me out. There in the bush was Jeff. Right as we notice him, he runs back to his house and we do the same. I rush to my parents who call the police. Nothing happened though because he didn't do anything. We go to bed and that was the last thing to happen for the rest of the summer. It's now August and school just started. Now Jeff has twin daughters who were friends with my sister. All three were in the same class and grade. I saw them a lot. At first they seemed like good kids. One Saturday afternoon and I hear the twins playing when I hear a window downstairs break. I come downstairs and the window on the front door is shattered. My mum sees it and I tell her that we will call my sister Kate and the twins. As I say this, I hear Kate upstairs yelling, "What happened?" I go outside and see the twins hiding behind one of the bushes in the front yard. I ask them if they broke the window and they said it was them. I tell them to go home and tell my mum. She goes to tell Jeff and before my mum can finish, he screams at her, saying that his perfect angels wouldn't do that. My mum comes back and goes in her room. I don't know what happened, but we just got the window repaired and that was that. Over the next 2 weeks I noticed that things are being moved around in our garage and front yard. I thought it was my siblings or parents until I walk in the garage and see the twins moving my brother's bike. I yell at them and they go home crying. Apparently they have been doing it the whole time and I was pissed. I tell my mum and she once again calls the police. They say to just lock the door. The next day I went to my friend's house and while I was gone Jeff came over and started yelling at my parents saying that I attacked his twins. I didn't. My parents never told me all of what he said, but apparently he threatened to kill me. Great. so I'm terrified of being home alone because I thought he would kill me. So now it's the day before Christmas Eve and I'm outside playing on my phone, and the twins come out of nowhere and grab my phone and run. I chase them, but they run in their house and I knock on the door and Jeff answers. I tell him that his twins have my phone. I was so scared, but I wanted my phone. He goes and gets it and throws it on the ground, shattering it. I scream at him and he pushed me down and said to get off his property. I called the police and he says that I tried to rape his daughters and I was brought in for questioning, and after a while they let me go because I never tried to rape the girls. I get home and I cry. I was so mad at him and scared. I didn't go outside the rest of winter break. So let's talk about his last month in my town. It's now May and school's finished. I was in my room and I hear the twins and Kate playing. Then I hear Kate crying extremely loud. I tell my dad and we go outside to see Kate crying on the ground with a gash on her head and a bloody rock on the ground. My dad goes to help her and it turns out that the twins hit my sister with a rock. I start yelling at the twins and Jeff and his wife come out. I tell the wife what's happened and she started freaking out. She had to have said sorry 4 times while trying to get the twins when Jeff says that Kate probably attacked the twins, and that pissed off my dad so much. My dad punched Jeff and it knocked him out. My mum calms down my dad and he takes Kate to the hospital, and I help Jeff in because his wife asked, and she has always been nice. Once I'm done with that, I go home and the police are called. No one presses charges and Jeff and his family leave 2 weeks later. So yeah, that's my story about my crazy neighbour. So Jeff and your twins, let's not meet again.
Andy, by they're out to get us. A few years ago, my brother-in-law bought another apartment complex in Florida. He owns a few apartment complexes in West Palm Beach, Miami, so when he told me he bought another one and wanted me to manage it, I figured out why not. I had just graduated college with my degree and planned to get my master's, so I figured I could manage this place while I graduated school. When he booked my flight to Orlando, I was stoked. I was so happy to be going. When I got there, we drove out of Orlando and I had this bad feeling though. When I finally got to where he bought the apartment complex, I was a little disappointed. It was almost as if a biker community and a retirement place had had a baby. I was annoyed that it was an hour from Orlando with its nightlife. I made it work though and soon settled into life, managing a small apartment complex. I had my own 1-bedroom apartment in the corner, and then there was 10 other tenants. Most were older folks, snowbirds and retirees that spent their days glorifying and swimming in the pool that we had. There was 2 military families with 1 small kid, and then there was Andy. Andy was an enormous guy. I'm pretty big, I'm 6'4" and 250 pounds, but he was at least 6'6" and 400 plus pounds. He walked with a cane and had long black hair and a ponytail. He worked from home, or so he said, but rumour was that he was on disability benefits after a terrible accident at work. I didn't really care. He paid his rent on time and was always quiet and kept to himself. I only ever went to his place once when his AC cut out. To my surprise, he was pretty neat. No food containers or pizza boxes or beer cans, all the things that I expected from a guy like him to have laying out. So if anything, this is probably a really good thing. So things in our complex went pretty good for the next year, until one night in November. It was raining, it always does in Florida, and it was about midnight when someone rang my doorbell. I looked out and saw one of my tenants, Joseph. Joe was one of my retirees who retired to Florida to, in his own words, play golf and drink beer. Normally he was all smiles and jokes, but that night his face was pale and he looked frightened. I hate to bother you, Sam, but something ain't right with Andy. I put my jacket on and followed him to his apartment since Andy was his neighbour. He then put his finger to his lips and motioned for me to listen. I put my ear up against the door and heard Andy fighting with someone. It sounded like whoever he was fighting with was throwing things. I was taken aback as he never had a guest over in years. So I knocked and heard him stomp over to the door, opened it. Now, normally he was well dressed, put together, and like I said, he wasn't a messy guy. But he answered in a sweatshirt that had grease stains. His hair was limp and greasy and he smelt like body odour. I peered in and asked him what he was doing, and I could see that the place looked like an absolute disaster. He told me it was pretty much alright and shut the door in my face. I sent Joe back into his place, told him to let me know if he heard anything else, and went back to bed. The next morning I decided to pay Andy a visit to see if he is alright, and so I went into his place and knocked. I got no answer, so decided that I was going to try again later. I got busy doing other things and then forgot completely about it. Now December rolls around, and I'm starting to get the monthly rent checks. None from Andy. That got me a bit worried because he was always on time with them. So I knock on his door and get nothing, and I knocked again, and I heard grunting and moaning. So I probably should have called the police, but instead I decided to open the door with the keys I had. First, I was hit with the foulest smell I've ever smelled in my life. It smelled like vomit amongst other things rolled into one nasty smell. The walls were streaked with what I assumed to be sick, and the place was trashed. I started calling for Andy while dialing 911, and then I hear moaning from the back bedroom. I can never unsee what I saw ever to this day. Andy was laying on his floor in some really dirty clothes, covered in his own urine and vomit. That was bad, but what was weirder was that he was covered in bites, human bites all over his arms and legs, and they were actually starting to swell with infection, and he was just bleeding all over as if he had been attacked. It was so weird because he was so normal up until this point. Was he fighting with someone? I didn't get my answer until a few days later, after he'd been rushed into hospital and was fighting for his life in the ICU. The doctors talked to his sister, who turned out to be his medical guardian, and things came into place. It turns out that Andy had multiple mental disorders, and that he stopped taking his meds a month before November, and there was no one else in the room, and that he'd been fighting and arguing with himself. He eventually got released and went to live with his sister, but when I was clearing out the room, I found photos of lots of the residents at this complex, including ones of me with X's put over us, and some parts of us, like our face, were burnt out with cigarettes. I'm not sure if this was part of his mental decline or something else. I just hope that he's doing alright. Terrifying Taxi Ride by Nightcrawler.
I was recently reminded of this encounter by my mother. If she hadn't brought it up, I probably would have gone the rest of my life without thinking of this incident. But once she did, then all these memories came flooding back. My family travelled from the Midwest to the East Coast almost every year. We usually drove through Canada to New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and then up to Maine, where my dad's family is from. We stopped at various tourist spots and resorts while on the trip. When I was somewhere around 6 or 7 years old, we were staying at a family-style resort in New Hampshire. It was a very large complex with 4 buildings full of hotel rooms, all facing each other, with a parking lot to the left, a small park or picnic area in the middle, and the outdoor pool with a fence around it to the right. Each building had 2 levels with outdoor stairs, and each room had a door that went outside, not into a hallway. There was a path from the bottom of the stairs through the small park to the pool. I have always been quick to get ready, so while my mum, dad and sister, who was 1 year older, were getting ready to go to the pool, I was getting antsy and wanted to go check out the tacky water slide tacked onto the side of the pool. I remember my dad being busy and distracted while I said, "I'm going out to the pool," and began walking outside and down the stairs. You could see the park and pool from our balcony, but my dad wanted me to wait. I didn't and proceeded to walk by myself out to the pool. I was walking along the path through the little park when two big arms picked me up and started pulling me back. This is what I have the sharpest memory of. My purple jelly sandals being lifted off the ground under me. I didn't immediately turn around because I just figured it was my dad dragging me back to the room, mad that I had disobeyed him. I just sighed and accepted my fate as being in trouble. Then I heard my dad in the distance yell, "Hey, get off my daughter!" or something similar, and so I finally turned to see who the hell was holding me. It was some guy, really tall, really thin, wearing dark colours. He had a car that was pulled up right to the park, not parked in a parking spot or anything, only about 20 feet away. I looked and saw my dad barrelling down the motel stairs holding my sister's water noodle and wearing his bright green neon water shorts. The dude saw my dad, dropped me, and then dove into the car, which promptly took off. I cried because I had scraped my leg in the fall. My dad chased the car for a short while, but they quickly picked up speed and were gone. I have no idea if the licence plate was recorded or the cops were called. We did continue to go to the pool and play, but I remember that my dad was in a bad mood the rest of the afternoon, and I couldn't get him to play in the pool with me. He usually was a big reader, but he just sat in a chair peering around the parking lot and looking miffed the rest of the afternoon. Who knows what would have happened if my dad hadn't been walking out behind me or looking out the window. I was honestly probably 10 seconds away from being thrown into that car and taken God knows where. So, creepy dude in New Hampshire. Let's not meet again. This story didn't happen to me, but to a very close male friend of 7 years. I was hanging out with him and a couple of other friends, and we were talking about our creepy experiences. Here is the story from his perspective. A little bit of background. I was 16 years old when this happened, living in Amman City, the capital of Jordan in the Middle East. I was in high school. I used to weigh 85 kilograms and was 192 centimetres tall, and I was a calm but intimidating person if I wanted to be, but never really messed with anyone, unless I was provoked to. I just got off school and decided I wanted to go downtown because I was bored and didn't want to stay at home. And I wanted to get some DVDs and games to enjoy later. So I decided to take the bus as I wanted to save money, but I had to take a taxi to the bus stop, which was about less than 10 minutes by car. When I stopped to come in taxi, inside the vehicle appeared a light-skinned man with black greasy hair, wearing a worn-out dark green shirt and a pair of jeans, who looked to be between the age of 30 to 34, and addressed me through the passenger window and asked, "Hey, where do you want to go? I need to go to the bus stop that takes me downtown. It is only 10 minutes away." "Well, I can take you downtown if you like. I'm going to pass by that area. I can drop you there and you don't have to pay me." At this point, a red flag should have gone off in my head, but I thought this man just wanted to be kind, and I really didn't want to go through the hassle of more than one trip, so I decided to hop into his car and we would be on our way. Looking back on it now, this was a big fucking mistake. Now, there are different ways to head downtown, and I only knew a couple of ways. As the man was driving, he started to take different routes that I had never seen before. Still, no alarm bells started ringing, as I only assumed that he was just taking a shortcut to get away from traffic. By this point, 20 minutes have passed, and I began to feel uneasy. Usually from the bus route I take, it only needs about 20 minutes to get downtown when there is little to no traffic. But I brushed it off once again. Then suddenly the man began to speak in his calm yet suspicious tone. "Hey, do you mind if I use your phone? I want to see if you have any videos or music I can send via Bluetooth." I found this to be a strange request, but seeing as the man was giving me a free ride, and the fact that I didn't have anything private in my phone, I handed it to him as I didn't want to be impolite and was just trying to break the awkward atmosphere. He played with the phone a little bit, then proceeded to put my phone with his own under the empty space of the driver's door handle. Doubts began circling my mind and I felt vulnerable without my phone. Yet despite all this, I silenced my doubts and stared to the window outside. The feeling of dread and uneasiness only grew more as I was not able to make out where we were exactly anymore. As the man kept driving, I only started to see empty road with only desert on both right and left sides, with only a couple of old worn out rusty shipping containers. It is getting darker at this point, and this is where things get even creepier. The man proceeds to pick up his phone and began to speak to someone at the end of the line, shouting the following with an angry voice. "I am coming to fuck you up, motherfucker. You better prepare yourself, as I'm coming to beat you up, you son of a bitch." As soon as the man ended the phone call, I knew something was absolutely wrong. Looking more closely at the phone he was holding, I was able to recognise that the phone he had was the type of phone that doesn't have Bluetooth. Alarm bells started ringing loudly in my head. The whole call came out of nowhere, and I could feel the dread, and the fear was absolutely real. I asked him for my phone back, growing nervous and impatient with each word escaping my mouth. He looked at me with this strange and annoyed look and said, "I just wanted to see what you got on your phone." By this point I had enough, and I sternly told him to give me my phone, the anger and fear barely contained in my voice. He hesitantly obliged after muttering back and forth, and I just knew I had to get out this car. Feeling a rush of adrenaline, I decided to pretend I was talking to my parents and created a scenario where there was an emergency and that I had to get back. So I began telling the man that I need to return back immediately and told him to drop me off right here and right now. As I was seeing an upcoming traffic light, I knew that this was my only chance of escape. I was not sticking around any longer to know where this man is taking me to God knows fucking where. As soon as the man stopped at the traffic light, I spoke to him in my most intimidating voice to open the passenger door. Luckily, there was a couple of cars that stopped next to us, and thank God the man responded with a menacing look and pressed the unlock button. I got out of that car faster than you could say "fuck this shit, I'm out," and went straight to a small run-out coffee break stop in the middle of nowhere as the taxi sped off. I went inside and asked the server if the downtown was close by, out of breath, with sweat dripping from my forehead. The server looked at me with a confused yet irritated face and said, "You know you are out of the capital, right? Heading to the city of Zarqa." Shit, I thought. Fucking shit. As I proceeded to call my parents to pick me up from the middle of nowhere. God knows I'm not taking a taxi to get back home or any time soon. Thinking about it after a while, the man planned on kidnapping me from the start, trying to take away my phone so I would not call for help, and proceeded to pretend he is having a fight with someone on the phone to secretly message his buddies that he is close by. Greasy black-haired taxi fuck. Let us never meet again.
You Won't Regret It by Crossroads Redlines. I'm a 20-year-old woman that lives on the West Coast. I have lived here for about 8 months. This happened within the first month of my time here. In most bigger cities, restaurants are partnered with cell phone delivery apps. The delivery people for these apps tend to frequently use the restaurant in which I'm working. Typically, I see the same 5 to 10 people multiple times a day, and you get to know them pretty well, except for one. He would only ever come in while we were busy and always tried to talk. In the annoyance of this, we would always end up ignoring him. One day, this man came back by to pick up multiple orders. I gave him the orders and turned around, barely acknowledging him. That is when the questions began. I should have seen the warning signs then. "Why don't you ever say hi to me?" he said with a creepy smile, the kind of smile that you give to someone that you know very well, the kind of smile that's only meant for friends. The way that he looked at me threw me off, but I have a small smile and said that I hoped that he had a good night. He then rolled his eyes back and went to put his deliveries in his car. He came back with his phone and told me to put my number in it. I politely declined his offer and he began to turn around. "You're gonna regret this, Charlene," he said, gently pushing his phone into my hands. At this point, I was extremely uncomfortable, but the restaurant was empty besides the chef in the back of the kitchen, and I couldn't get his attention, so I set his phone down and said what any other person would. I wrote down a fake number on a napkin. To my own horror, he picked up the number and began to dial it into his phone. He puts it up to his ear and rolls his eyes in frustration. "Just give me your real number." I then wrote down my real number, but not with the correct area code, hoping that he would be okay with that. I had just moved here recently, so my area code wasn't easy to figure out without knowing my life before the West Coast. "Colleen, you didn't write down your area code." My heart started beating quickly. I'd never given him my name, and I never wore a tag. "Pick up the phone, and when I call you, if you answer, I will then leave the restaurant." I could tell he meant it. He would not leave until I provided him at least that. He called, the phone vibrated in my pocket. I knew that I'd probably just made the biggest decision of my life. I showed him the phone, then he left. I loved my job, but the worst part was the distance. I always took the bus home and had to take multiple switches in order to get home, and it was typically an hour commute. This is not a problem during the day, but I usually got off work at around 11, so it was risky. Around about halfway through my commute, I received a call from a number I didn't recognise. I decided just to answer it out of curiosity, and partly because I thought it was someone asking me to cover their shift the next day, but the voice said, "Oh babe, you didn't have to take the bus home. I would have driven you home. Someone as pretty as you should never have to do that. What are you doing tonight? Want to come over? My friends are with me and we could come your place." I quickly hung up the phone. When the bus reached a stop about a block from my home, I was lucky enough to see that my neighbour had been sitting near the front of the bus and was able to walk with him back into our apartment building. For the next 2 weeks, I got 10 calls a day and about 15 texts, all of which were increasingly strange. Most of them were just about how pretty he thought I was, but then they began to make me fearful. He began to offer me money and tell me that he could find me a better job suited for somebody as pretty as me. He started coming in for deliveries, and finally I told my boss about what was happening. The next time that this guy came in, my boss pulled him to the side and warned him about his behaviour and saying that it was not okay. He then told him that if he ever did that again, then we were going to report him to the company that he worked for. He stopped for about a month then. At this point, I had picked up a morning job too, and would begin walking to work at around 5:30 AM, while it was still extremely dark. On this particular morning, I was so paranoid that I didn't turn on music and was looking for people behind me. This is when I saw him. He walked up next to me as if we were friends and put his arm around my shoulder. Every alarm in my body was telling me to run. "I've been waiting for you. Let me walk you to your work. You won't regret it." How did he know that I'd got another job too? I had declined telling him that I needed to do homework and turned into the cafe that was closest to us. I made them aware of the issue and they allowed me to stay inside until he finally decided to leave the area. That's when the private calling began. The frequency of the calls began to pick up and he would leave angry messages. In my mind, what I did next was a good idea, but I quickly learnt how wrong I was. The next time he called me, I answered the phone. When he asked why I never made an effort to talk to him anymore, like I ever had, I told him that I was gay, and that it wasn't anything wrong with him, he just wasn't my type. "Just give me a chance, I can change you. You never had a man treat you right, you won't regret it." Things then stopped for a while. There was a text here and there, but nothing. About a month ago though, it began to get weird, commenting on my Instagram posts things like, "Wow, you're so beautiful." There are so many things I would do to stop him, but he would just continually do so, writing stuff like, "Stop ignoring me, am I treating you right?" and many other things of this nature. I blocked him and he would make a new one. He would then call me again a few times and leave a few long messages that I would try to ignore. I stopped taking the bus and made sure that everyone between my friends and family were fully aware of the situation in case anything happened to me. Then he showed up again, this time on Valentine's Day, at 3 AM outside of my window. I woke up to my name being screamed outside of my window. You see, I live on a busy street and my bedroom has large windows. I had them open because of how beautiful the night had been before I fell asleep. I turned over without lifting my head, as I knew he would never be able to see me. About every 5 minutes he would scream my name and say that he could see me and knew I was there. He told me to come down and talk to him, and right before he left he said one more thing that I almost didn't hear. "You're going to regret this." That was a few days ago. I haven't had anything happen yet.